Yes, Sports Day on a Monday night. What an incredible weekend of footy we've just had. We seem to say that every single week. But this week certainly provided some extraordinary games of football. And Luke Hodge is here to take us through from Friday night all the way through to Sunday night. Hodgie, welcome.
Good afternoon, guys. Yeah, incorrect, Gerard. I'm not starting with the Hawks or the Lions or where Cooper's going to play. I thought I'd touch on a team that I tipped for the premiership at the start of the year and their fall from grace because I think I've been spruiking it up for the first 18 weeks of the year that I'd tipped Sydney and Sydney were going to go on to win it. I've gone a little bit shy on that prediction at the moment and look, the first 3 or 4 games that they had lost were close ones, and you thought, they're a good team, but they lost to other good teams, and you can understand that. But the last 2 have been damning for them. Against the Doggies, they were embarrassed, and then talk about embarrassment, what they did against Port Adelaide, and we all know John Longmire's a pretty ferocious coach, and they're a very hard-nosed Sydney team. But what they put out there, contested possession, clearances, that first quarter was terrible for Sydney's players and the standards they live by. I think, have you ever seen a Sydney side get outscored, or there was 11 shots to 0, and it just goes down to their mindset. The contested possessions at quarter time was 41-17. That's the second worst quarter of football this year out of any team. I think North Melbourne had a worse quarter. That was about it. But you sort of look at how they gave up their goals.
So where do they get to? How do they get to this mindset, and how do they get out of it, Hodgie?
I think what happens is when things are going your way, you do get a little bit leery. And look, Sydney are a very hard-nosed, strong team, but they've got some very leery players that it looks really good when things are going their way. But things that stood out for me was how many times they coughed the ball up in the defensive 50, which was left to Port Adelaide to pick up and hit easy goals, get simple goals. The pressure that Port Adelaide had on them wasn't there. It was like a training drill for most of it. They were getting clearances. They were going willy-nilly. And then I thought, well, you go in at half-time and you've had 21 scoring shots to 4. It's 13 goals, 8 to 1 goal, 3. And you think John Longmire would have given the biggest all-time sprays. But then at the start of the third quarter, the same thing happens. Radaglia takes an uncontested mark 40 metres out, kicks a goal. 3 minutes into the third quarter after, if anyone saw the replay of John Longmire, he was fuming at that half-time interview. But then straight after the Radaglia goal, it's a centre clearance straight down and Dixon takes a mark. Like it wasn't Sydney, and some of these things that have just sort of slipped into their game, they're picking and choosing when to go. Like the Sydney of old that we knew and the Sydney that we thought of the first 10 or 15 rounds was a hard-nosed, physical, aggressive style of football, but they did have some flair. It just looks like that flair has sort of got into their head a little bit, and they didn't want to put in the hard work, especially the last 2 weeks.
Can they turn it around? Papley's a big out, won't be back until the first week of finals potentially. Is it possible to turn it around, or is you putting a line through?
No. You can't put a line through a team who is a fair way better than most other teams. Like to be 3 games clear at the round 17, round 18 shows that they've got the quality to beat any team out there. And I think it's just there's a few areas that they've dropped. So scores from turnover that Sydney was so good at putting pressure on, turning the ball over and going to score. They were rated number 1 up until round 15. From round 16 onwards, they've dropped to 14. And then other teams defending against them, turning a Sydney disposal over and going back up until round 15, they were scored against the least. They're now jumped up to 16. So both of those areas they've dropped away in. But there's also like a Sydney team, as I spoke about, they're a hard-nosed team. Like clearance differential, they were rated 2nd in the first 15 rounds.
Yes.
They've dropped to 18th. Since round 16, Sydney are rated 18 for clearance differential. It's just not that hard-nosed team that we've been looking at, whether they're drinking their own bathwater or whether they've just been picking and choosing. They've got 3 weeks to sharpen themselves up because it's a pretty big final series if they're playing football like that.
Tommy used to say, heads like Bordenhouse puddings. I think there's a little bit of that. Although I think the Bordenhouse pudding would be well and truly deflated. I'm glad you've got goal umpiring referrals on your list, Hodgie, because it was potentially the worst round of the year for goal umpires.
Yeah, look, goal umpire, it's a tough job, especially when you've got that many different players jumping up, touching the ball on the line, trying to take hangers on you. But there was a couple that I was sort of shaking my head at. I think there was was it Jones from GWS and Dempsey from Geelong? They were just 2 that sort of stuck out. That they've had snaps around the corner and it's flicked the side of the post 4 or 5 players have pointed up. Yeah. The umpire is standing underneath in the prime position, looking up to see that ball deflect off the post.
Yeah, the player reaction at Geelong was absolute, but the one that was on the Giants, it nearly broke the post in half.
How
that goal umpire actually referred, that was bewildering.
But I didn't want to have a go because I'm a big fan for the score review when it's used quickly and it's done at the right time. But there's a couple there where you got pay attention. Like seriously, if you're standing in the right position with both umpires and you can look up. Players that are pushing and shoving with their opponent could see that it hit the post.
It's not a community involvement award.
We had an issue on Friday night where the boundary umpire got a little bit confused as to whether the ball had hit the post or not, and then that goal umpire then lost total confidence. I think one of the problems, Hodgie, still is the positioning of the umpire, and their position where they're coached to be. They want to straddle the line rather than be under the flight of the ball. That they're not actually in a great view sometimes to see whether it shaves the post that they're looking at from, say, 3 or 4 metres away rather than under the line of the ball.
Yeah, and I can understand that. There's times where they have to get parallel to the post to look to see if they're going to touch it on the line or not. But then there's a couple where you're actually standing underneath the ball to see what's going on. But anyway, I didn't want to umpire bash. I just saw that. I thought that was a couple that we just need to maybe give them a little bit of a tickle and say, just pay attention.
I just want to go back to, because I've got a question for both of you. We were talking about Sydney before, but when, Hodgie, you were obviously captain of Hawthorn for a long time, and Gerard, you were one of the very best players in the competition. When you lost form as a player at any point, how hard is it to lead, and how do you have conversations with the others when you kind of know that, my form's dropped off a bit here, which is actually having an impact on the team? Because that seems to be the case at Sydney, is their best players are some of the key reasons why they're not going so well, because they're not they're playing at their best.
Yeah, football's it's a hard game. Like it is a tough game, and for Sydney players to be how good all those midfielders were was unreal. All 4 of them flying at the same time, but there is times that you're going to go in and out of form, and every player goes through it. There's been maybe Bont's probably the only one that I haven't seen go out of form in the last 10 years, but everyone else will go in and out of form. It's about the stuff that you do away from the ball that sort of keeps you in the game. It's the leadership stuff that they're still doing, but a lot of those guys have fallen away getting the ball or having impact with the ball, but it's their intent around to chase, tackle, put blocks on, do the stuff that isn't noticed outside the rooms, where that's what they're still got to rate themselves on internally when they're doing their reviews. But you speak about that. You look at Heaney's still getting just as much ball as what he did earlier, but it's the impact, it's the metres gained, it's the effectiveness with the kick. Like he was rated up until round 15. He was rated the second best player in the AFL behind Bont.
Yep.
Since then, he's 156 in the AFL. So you sort of sit back and go, yes, the suspension sort of jumped in there as well, but his form sort of dropped away. But he's still, stats-wise, he's still getting similar touches. But it's the effectiveness, whether teams have been able to shut him down, limit him, putting pressure on him. They're tagging him a lot more now. But that's a massive drop-off, and that's just one. There's got other guys in there around the Sydney team that have had similar drop-offs.
The Lizard looks like he's operating in a blizzard right at the present time. I haven't seen the Lizard look so confused for a long, long period of time. Have sides just worked out the Swans taken away their corridor kick and they haven't got a plan B?
Well, I think if you look at how the Lizard wants to play, he's that dashing halfback runner who wants space, who wants a bit of flair, and he can take the game on. If you listen to Port Adelaide last week, and I think it was either Rosie or Butters that sort of their interview post-game was about taking away their corridor football. So if you take away the corridor, you congest it. What does that do to Blakey's game? It just shuts that right out. So if he's trying to do dashing runs, he can only do it to the left back flank because the right one, he's not running to his right side of his body because he can't kick on his right. So what that does, it jams up his style, but it also takes away all the Sydney specialist kicks that they have going through, the kicks that Heaney were doing at the start of the year, all those risky ones that were turning into goals. They can't take those now because they've got opposition players lined up in the corridor waiting for it, and they've made them force themselves down the line, which goes against the flair that Sydney have wanted to play for and what they have done for the last 2.5 years.
Hodgie, I'm going to read the ladder down from the top, and it's a very much a brief yes or no with Hodjo. Can these sides win the flag? And when I say can, I don't mean mathematically can. I mean are likely to be involved in the race in the prelim finals.
These just aren't one-word answers.
No, prelim finals. Sydney Swans, yes or no?
Yes, they can.
Brisbane Lions.
Yes, they can.
Port Adelaide.
Not convinced yet. Because we've seen them finish in the top four and get knocked out in big pressure games. Their test will be when they come against a hard-nosed defensive side. When they turn the ball over, will they get scored against? So I'm not sold on Port Adelaide just yet.
Giants are in fourth spot on 52 points with a better percentage than Geelong. Yes or no?
Yeah, I think they can.
Geelong, yes or no?
I've been told never to rule out Geelong, but they're questionable. Not as confident with those as the others.
What about the Dockers, who were super disappointing yesterday?
I reckon, yes, Freo can. With that midfield, the contested footy they can do, their ruckman, they can dominate through there. Their young forward line would be a bit of a concern. Can they shape up against the best defence and kick a winning score in a final? Incredibly,
in seventh position, the Western Bulldogs.
Yes, yeah, Western Bulldogs can. You sort of look through and go, how convincing. It sounds weird, the fact that we weren't putting Lobb in the team for the first parts of it, but he's stabilised the back line with Jones. So they've got two key defenders who can intercept mark, but also play on blokes. So then you've got Dale running off the back line. Their midfield has been elite, and their forward line are working as good as anyone. Jamara looks like he's full of confidence, apart from his goal kicking, but every other part of his game. Norton's floating in there as well. They've got a balanced side. The Doggies, it's the first time they've had it for a while.
And Carlton with no TDK, probably, maybe first final.
Yeah, that's a sure. Carlton's best. As I read before, Carlton's best is good enough. But what they have to do is they've got to work on those flaws and those areas that they've dropped away that I mentioned before.
The Bulldogs, Gerard, they are now only a game outside the top four, and they've got the second best percentage behind the Swans. And if you look at the draw that the Bulldogs have got compared to some of the other teams sort of in the fight for top four, and based on the way they're going, Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval this weekend, then they've got North Melbourne and they finish with the Giants and Ballarat. So they'll start favourites in all of those games. And with the percentage the way they've got them, they might only need to win two of those three to finish top four.
What are your thoughts on the Blues?
I think if TDK doesn't come back and have an influence, I think they're now in trouble.
Are they risk of losing eighth spot? You look at.
I think you could argue that for. Let me just get the ladder back up. Certainly argue that for Carlton. I think the Bulldogs are fine. Fremantle have got three really hard games. Cats have got a tough run, and the Giants have got a really tough run home. I think their win on the weekend gives them that breathing space.
Yeah, we talked about that before the break. So with the Giants, Hodgie, with what they were able to do, they've got Brisbane at the Gabba this week, then they've got Fremantle at home and the Bulldogs away. So I think that's the hardest run of any of them. So to get that win just takes the pressure off them a little bit, but there's still no certainty to make it.
No, and I think that's the best part about this season, how even it is. You normally get to this stage and you've got a couple of sides that are fighting for that top 8 or top 4 spot that will play each other. Because from second spot down to about 12th or 13th, there's only a game or two involved. They're all massive, important games. So I'm looking at Carlton going, Hawthorn could only make the finals if they beat Carlton this week. Yep. If they don't beat Carlton this week, I think they're done because they finish home strong. They finish with Richmond and North Melbourne. But having an extra gap there by losing to Carlton this week, if they do, then I think that's their finals hopes gone. And with the Blues, you sort of look through at the Blues and where have they started and where have they got to? I think they're very similar to what Sydney have been doing as far as their best is good. The best is up there with the best, but their worst is as bad. You look through at some of the best things that the Doggies like. Once you get the ball inside forward 50. Not the Doggies, the Blues, sorry. Once you get the ball inside forward 50, they're the best team at scoring from getting them in there. So they're efficient once they get it in, the Blues. When you've got a Curnow and Mackay and the likes in there, they're number one from scoring from forward half intercepts. So they put the pressure on. Once they get it in there, they can turn the ball over. They're number one from scoring and that. They're number two for contested possessions. We talk about the Bulls through that midfield. And they're number one for pressure. So you look through that and go, can Carlton win it? Of course they can. If they can produce that kind of football, they could win the premiership without a shadow of a doubt. The issues for me that I have with the Blues, and we've said it for a while, is scores from stoppage against. They're rated 17th. So they're the second easiest team to score against when they lose a stoppage. Centre bounce scoring, when their defenders are just 6v6, they're rated 16th worst at opposition scoring against you. And the one that sort of sticks out for me, which this is going to be a big test for them in finals against good defences, is their transition ball. Their D50 to forward 50, moving the ball from one end to the other. They're the third worst in the AFL to do it. And you sort of look through and go, these are pretty big areas that you need to be good at if you're going to salute in September.
So they've got a tough one coming up with Hawthorn. Then they've got the Eagles, and then in round 24, and that's the Eagles away, and they're not as easy as the latter's position says, as the weekend showed. And then they got the Saints in the last round. So nothing's easy right now for anybody.
And even against Fremantle, West Coast led them by 20 points in the first half. So,
if you look at North Melbourne pushed Carlton until three-quarter time. Yep. So this is what we're saying there. If you're going to give these teams that are lower than you a bit of a sniff, like you look at before this weekend, as Ross was saying, we can't make the finals, but we can have an impact on the guys up there. What do you reckon these other teams are doing? North Melbourne want to have as many upsets as you can. West Coast, they would love to knock off Carlton next week over there to see if they can put a line through there.
You've got a coach coaching for his position in his potential senior spot.
What was that, sorry?
You've got a coach of the Eagles, Jared Schofield, coaching for potentially his job.
Yeah, and you've got that spark of a new voice coming through. So a lot of those West Coast players don't have contracts next year. What do you reckon they're playing for? They're coming out giving their absolute they're giving everything to prove to the new coach, whoever it is, whether it's Schofield or whether it's a new guy coming in, to a list manager. They're trying to prove a point that they want to survive on that list and keep playing AFL football.
I'm not sure you saw that game live, Hodgie, but it was an amazing finish. And just to see the tempo rise and the crowd get behind the Eagles, and just, I mean, it was fanatical footy.
Well, I was doing the Doggies and Melbourne game, so I didn't watch it live. Watched parts of the replay, but I did see comments on Twitter about how loud the West Coast supporters were. It was a team that hadn't probably had that support for the last 2 years because of the football they're playing, but it just shows the passion that the Eagles supporters over there still do have, and it definitely got behind the players. Like, they played some lively football, and Gold Coast, we've said it time and time again, they dropped away. Like, they had a really good start to the game, but when the pressure was on, a lot of their forwards, Lukosius, King, I know Mac Andrew played forward, kicked 3 goals in the first half, but they had 10 touches between them in the second half. So Gold Coast is still scratching your head at their interstate record.
So Jamie Graham has said he's not going to go for the West Coast job.
Surprises, to be honest.
Dan Cox isn't going either, and I think they were two names that West Coast were pretty keen to talk to. I'm not sure who necessarily leaves for that position, but even the way that they finished off that game last night and how heavily emotionally invested the senior players were, and they seem to have bounced back to the sort of form they were showing at the start of the year. And you see the crowd, you think, well, it wouldn't be a bad job because you get time, and two former Eagles players have said, no.
No, it's interesting. A lot of people, I think, would be looking at just how tough it is to be the rebuilding coach. Adamuse's going through that right now, and who knows what squad they're going to have. Tassie's coming in, so that's going to make any rebuild even more difficult, Hodgie. So maybe there's people saying, well, probably better off holding out. But somebody like Schofield, he's sitting there thinking this might be the job.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the interim coaches, do they work though? If someone who has been in the program, how long has he been assistant there for?
A couple of years.
Yeah, a couple of years. Blokes that have been in the program, that have stepped up, they don't bring a lot outside of what the coach has already been there. Because normally if you're an assistant coach, you're throwing up all your ideas and they've either tried them, tested them. So I think they'll be looking for someone outside of the playing group, outside of the coaching group, to try and bring in to bring something different from another club. But as you said, West Coast is, yes, their performance the last 3 years haven't been up to scratch, but they're a big club. They've got a lot of money. The resources are wherever they're stocked for you. So I thought it'd be pretty appealing for a lot of potential coaches out there. Yeah,
I thought the same thing. The Magpies on Saturday night is obviously a big night for Scott Pendlebury, but it was also a big night for Collingwood to keep their season alive. And it's fair to say that Mitch McGovern kept Collingwood's season alive. But can they do any damage without Jordan De Goey? That's to both of you.
Yeah, I think if you look at well done to Collingwood players and like how they looked after Scotty Pendlebury, what they did before the game. If you talk about celebrating an absolute champion of your football club, they did everything possible that they could to do it. The build-up, even getting in the song about Pendlebury, I think everyone's heard that on the radio, which is an absolute ripper. Yeah. Getting them out, get them to do it and play that out in the MCG before the game was another highlight. But then to finish off, the Collingwood players played with a spark that we hadn't seen for a while from them. And I know that it's hard to give more energy than what you would any other week, but it felt like they were doing it. They were doing everything they possibly could for Pendles because they knew how important it was for him, but also the club to keep their finals hopes alive. And I know we stirred up the Collingwood supporters a couple of weeks ago when they had a bit of a go with Ginnivan.
You did.
We had a bit of fun, but I generally felt for them because they were so excited on the Pendlebury part of things, but then all of a sudden you look across and go, we finally get a bit of life, and then we lose De Goey for the rest of the season. You sit back and go, I know a lot of teams have injuries at this time of year, but Collingwood have consistently, when they've looking like taking that next step, they've lost someone. Like they played probably half the season with no forward line, like with their main forwards out, and then all of a sudden they get their forwards back. They start to look pretty good. All of a sudden, one of your X factors who you need to win big finals, who will stand up and kick your 3 goals or kick a big clearance goal when you need it. Now he's out for the rest of the year. So you sort of sit back, and I know we had a bit of fun with him, but you do feel for him because as soon as they get a bit of a spark, something like that happens and they get flattened again.
There it is. It was always going to come, Collingwood supporters. The square up has now been tabled by Hodgie. The Essendon centre bounce at the death. I just absolutely loved it. A, because the ruckman hit it to where he actually said he was going to hit it, and B, the fact that Merritt just read it so under so much pressure. Had the same opportunity a couple of weeks ago. They got better from that point on, and they nailed it.
Well, for any team out there who are playing Collingwood, after playing Essendon in these next 3 weeks, if you come down to a stoppage and it's late in the last quarter, Essendon need to score, you better understand the blueprint of what they do. They start with a defensive triangle. The person at 9 o'clock will roll around to the sweeper. Merritt, the skipper on his left, will start at 6 o'clock at the sweeper position and run to a 10 o'clock hit and get it onto his left. The first time they did it, he had shoulders out Martin, could have hit Martin, went long. It didn't work. This time, Durham come off the square. I'm not sure what he was doing coming off the square because he pretty much ran into where Merritt was running to. I reckon that might be shown and sort of said, what are you doing? But he ended up giving the handball. Merritt gave the handball over to Durham, who ran through and kicked the winning point. So anyone out there in these next 3 weeks, if you talk about scouting, understanding, that is a blueprint of what they do when they need to score.
How many famous winning points can you remember, Hodgie? I've got 2 for you. One,
Plugger.
Barry Breen and Plugger. They're the 2 most famous ones I can remember.
Yeah, and then that's the thing is it worked for them. Like so, both times. So clearly, you look through and go, well done to the coaching staff, well done to the players for them because it's not easy. You've got a team in there that are trying to just lock it in, and that was the other thing. Adelaide did the same, and so did Fremantle. They went man on man to try and shut the game down. In a centre bounce, you can't because if you're following your man around, you're leaving too much space for the opposition ruckman. If they get their hands on it, they know exactly where it's going. So you need to sit in a defensive area. And if they do get a stoppage, make sure they're kicking over hands, not let them run out of the front, as Essendon did against Adelaide and against Fremantle.
Hodgie conveniently forgot Jimmy Bartell's point one day against Hawthorn at the MCG.
I was getting to that next.
Yeah, that's right. I must confess, Hodgie, I was thinking of you yesterday, almost a bit of vindication because you've been pretty strong in swimming against the tide that Essendon had improved, even though they were going through those tough couple of weeks. The fact that they did bounce and beat Fremantle probably vindicates you a little bit that the Bombers are on the right track potentially.
It's not about. I think the Bombers have come a long way, and yes, there's still a long way to go. Like to go from where they have, and it sounds like their biggest area of improvement was professionalism. Scotty's mentioned a couple of times about their fitness, and that comes with professionalism in the off season, making sure they're doing bigger pre-seasons to come back fitter, stronger, and can run out a whole season. So clearly, they've still got a long way to go. But I think from where they have come from to where they are now. They've definitely improved, but it's just that next step. What are they going to do to finish off this season? But then in that 6 months before March 2025, how much more improvement can they do? How much more professional can the players do? And can they get to round 17, 18 in round 2025 and not say we're fatigued again and run out of games and lose games that they shouldn't?
As long as you can walk the walk, as they say, which brings me to the Gold Coast, Hodgie.
We're not going to the bye, pre-finals bye.
We're going to come to the pre-finals bye and the wildcard. The Gold Coast, have they got the talent they think they've got?
Yes, they do.
They have? Okay.
Yeah, they do.
So it's not a talent issue?
It's definitely not a talent issue because if you can beat every team apart from the Brisbane Lions who have played consistently at that ground, you've definitely got the talent there. It's just whether you can put it when your back's against the wall. It's about digging deep. It's about having the mindset of whenever you're going away, you do the same routines, you do the same things as you would at home, so you can perform the same. Whether it doesn't matter, the dimensions of an oval may change a few metres here or there, but most of it's normal. Conditions may change a little bit depending on what state you're playing, but everything else apart from our game, you should be able to be more consistent than what they've showed. And that's, I mean, you sort of look through their possession getters on the weekend. It's the same guys. It was Rao, it was Flanders, it was
Anderson.
Anderson had 30 as well. But then you look at the other end, and I'm not sure if they were just starved, but their forwards didn't get a sniff, did not get near it. And I do feel for King a little bit in the fact that the Suns' last 4 weeks, their intent early has been, you can't argue with their intent early.
Yeah.
But it's just been their goal kicking which has let them down. And that's what let them down against the Lions. It let them down against GWS. But that's the part that he's got to work on. But their intent to get opportunities to win the game early has been good, but they've just dried up as the game's gone on. And it's almost like as soon as their back's against the wall, they give up.
Do you think there'll be some names cold, serious names?
Oh, Dimmer is known for that. So Dimmer's gone up there with, and there's no doubt he would have found a few guys there that he probably didn't know much of or didn't rate before he got there, just from being all coaches have opinions on lists that they see from time to time, but it's until you actually get there, see how they train and see where they could sort of fit into his game style. But there's blokes there who may be able to get something for all. You look at a Lukosius who probably hasn't lived up to what we thought he might have been able to do and what we've seen him do in the past. Does Dimmer look at him and go, can we get someone else who might fit better into my game style? Because clearly with the output that he's consistently been doing, you'd probably sit there going, they could probably find someone else that suits Dimmer's game style. And I said, Dimmer's got a game style that's worked for Richmond for a number of years, and it's proven that at home it can work as well. So maybe he just needs a few other guys that may fit his mould a bit better.
Gerard, is Lukosius a first-round draft pick?
No, not in my mind.
Oh, I reckon someone will chase him for a first round. I reckon.
When you say first round, is he top 10? Definitely not. I wouldn't be throwing
Adelaide or Port Adelaide's first pick? No,
not for me. No.
If you get him, on a third defender, I reckon he could cause a lot of trouble.
Well, he gets on a third defender now.
What's that?
He gets the third defender now with Big Mac Andrews and.
Dimmer's game style isn't great for forwards. It's a take ground, it's a get it going forward, it's a kick it off the ground, it's a knock on. You get someone who's all about ball movement, leading patterns, hitting up a forward. I reckon he could cause a lot of trouble on a third defender in a team that moves the ball really well. You look at Port Adelaide. If he went to a Port Adelaide, had a third defender, and the way and how fast they move the ball with Rosie, Butters, Horn-Francis kicking it to you, I reckon he could cause a lot of trouble.
Okay, so Port Adelaide or Adelaide?
Well, I've only said that because he's South Australian, and there's always that sort of lure from those clubs. I must confess, Gerard, I'm more with you than with Hodgie on Lukosius. But I also feel that there will be a club that thinks they can get the best out of him because he has been a bit of a tease through his time at the Suns.
So you're saying like a Sydney? Sydney might be able to look at him and go and turn him around because Sydney have...
Well, the small confines of the SCG, Gerard, you'll be able to kick from one end of the ground to the other.
Oh, it'll make a massive amount of difference.
Well, we'll come back to this. If he goes, we're not saying he's still contracted there, but if he goes, we'll be interested. Suns aren't going to give him up for anything outside of first rounder. So
should they then use those picks for senior players or just keep replenishing the younger players?
Well, I reckon any picks that they do, they'll probably throw it to Richmond if it looks like that. The Rioli connection's there. So would he bring in a Rioli for a Lukosius because Rioli understands his game style? It's going to help teach those guys the way he wants it to be played.
Ironically,
played forward, he's played back.
Lukosius would be a big beneficiary if Rioli ended up on the Gold Coast. So anyway, we'll see. I think what they're going to be chasing is those hard-nosed running smalls like Daniels and Castagna, etc., that were very much fundamental to their premiership side that I don't think he's got too many of at the present time.
No, he does. And that's the thing. That's what he's searching. He'll have players. And there might not be big names at a club that he's after. He might be, as you said, those role players that are happy to go up there on half the price of some bigger names, but they suit his game style better and you get more bang for buck for what he pays for them.
On the temper text, there has been a couple of messages that have come in saying, will Hodgie give any credit to Port Adelaide at all? This is your platform, Hodgie. It's over to you.
That's what my next topic I was going to talk about is do we give Port, you actually read it, do we give Port Adelaide some credit? Because you sort of look through and the games, and everyone's goes hard at Port when they fell down last year in the two finals, getting home finals and went out in straight sets. And that's why I've got probably a little bit of a question mark over them for when that comes to finals this year. But we have not given them credit. Like the game against Hawthorn, when Hawthorn were up by so much, everyone spoke about Hawthorn. They lost it. They dropped it. It was the Hawks one to lose. You look at round 17 against the Bulldogs when they absolutely flogged Bulldogs, but Bulldogs weren't rated back then. So it was like, it was only the Bulldogs. It's not a great home win, but they pants them, and look what the Doggies are doing now. Go to round 20 when they tactically shut down Carlton's game style. They came out and said that we don't want them to switch the ball. We want them to go long down the line because Carlton are the worst team at retaining the ball when they go long down the line. So they tactically outsmarted them and kept them to it was a boring game, but it was a game that they won. And then you go on the weekend, and because all the talk has been about Sydney were terrible, Sydney weren't up to it.
Yep.
How about Port Adelaide? Port Adelaide were on. Their stoppages were as elite. Their contested possession was unreal. Their forward half pressure caused turnovers, it caused goals. So I'm agreed. Maybe we start to give Port Adelaide a little bit of a pump up rather than go the other way and say the teams that they've played has either dropped the ball or just didn't come with a switched on attitude.
Was it the best game you've seen Corn Francis play?
He's played some good ones. He has played some good ones, but even the touch, the way to touch, his burst and power. Every time he might have 10 touches games, and you still think he's had 15 or 20 because of the impact that he has, and they're the ones that you do notice. But you sort of go through and pick a bad player for Port Adelaide on Saturday night. So you look through, and when they had 38 scoring shots to 11, they've won by 10 in the clearances. Contested possession, they've had 35 more inside 50s than Sydney. They've had 27, 28 more contested possession. It was just a demolition from a Port Adelaide side that I think a lot of their supporters are wondering. I know Kane's touched on it a bit, but have been wondering why the booing of Kenny about 6 weeks ago. They've definitely changed their spirits at the moment.
Well, they got Melbourne, then they've got the Showdown Mark II, and then in the final round they have got
Fremantle
over in the Dockerland. So,
and they actually play quite well over there too.
Well, they're going to have to knock off the Dockers.
That could be an interesting game there. It could be potentially a spot for a top four.
Yep.
That last spot in the top four. Gerard, you've got a very important question that you want to ask Hodgie.
I do indeed. Hodgie's been a split decision on the temper text wildcard rounds, and you are the final arbiter.
Split down the middle.
Whitey's not going to like this. I feel if we've got the bye in between round 24 and finals, I think we should do it. Because I hate the fact that we have a big finish to the end of the season, massive finish to the end of the home and away season, and then all of a sudden it's like we've got no footy. I hate the fact that we have no football from our last game flowing in to our first final. And you sort of sit back, and I know the AFL brought it in to even up the competition and that kind of stuff, and the Bulldogs had success in that first year. But I feel that if we've got a team who finishes on the top four spots, and they should have the double chance, but they should also get a longer break than the other team. So it's either if they win the first final, if they have a gap, win the first final, they play one game in 27 days. And I don't think it's fair on the top two teams who win through. So I'm a big one for the wild card.
What about we just don't have a break between the home and away season and the finals?
Then bring that forward. I'm happy with that. Bring the finals forward. So it's round 24 straight into it. And the gap that you have is before grand final. So we have a 2-week build-up into it. And the person who gets concussed in a prelim does not miss out on a grand final because he has over 12 days to recover. So take out the bye, bring the finals forward, and then have the bye leading into the grand final. So anyone with a concussion can play.
The General has spoken. Richard Goyder, that will just be sent via pigeon to Richard Goyder at some stage soon. Stand by for an announcement by the AFL Commission.
You can send...
I hated the fact that the AFLW, I forget her name, apologies, the skipper of Adelaide a few years ago, who missed out on the grand final because of that. She got
Chelsea Randall.
In a prelim. Chelsea Randall, thank you. And you sit back and you feel for it. You play your whole career to play in a grand final, for her to captain a grand final, and she can't play because of the concussion rules. I understand why we do it, because it's the safety of the players. But if we've got a pointless bye at the end of round 24, bring the finals forward. At least the bye is there to build up for the grand final, so all the media can do their stuff, families can plan around it, and most importantly, we get our best players on the track.
And it will happen, Gerard. There will be
Definitely
a player
happen.
in a preliminary final because it's happening obviously more and more with the awareness around concussion. And I'd like there to be a situation that it's changed before it happens.
Yeah,
be a bit proactive on it.
Can you imagine Carlton this year? So Carlton have had a dry spell since 1995. They get there, they win the prelim final, but all of a sudden, Curnow and Cripps run into each other. They both have head knocks, and they're going into a grand final without Curnow and Cripps because we're putting a bye before the finals. You don't want to see that. You don't want to see support. You know how much it means to supporters. You know how much it means to players. You don't want to see it. And I agree with you. I want them to make the change before it actually happens, and then you break someone's heart.
So I just noticed that... Jackson Archer has become the third North Melbourne player to land a Telstra Rising Star. Is that this week or is that last week?
No, that would be today if that's just
happened. Okay, so that's just come through. And I was looking for the coaches' votes, but I think we've probably gone in camera for the last...
No, they've come out.
They have come out, have they?
They have come out. We might go through those after the next break when Hodgie leaves us, but they have definitely gone through. There's a couple of texts, Gerard, that have just come in about the pre-final bye. That would go once Tasmania comes into the competition because of the way the bye works. But,
why?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say.
That
actually won't make any impact at all because there's been byes through the last few years with still the bye at the end of the home and away season. So,
well, somebody will have 2 byes in a row. I'm hearing. Is that right? One's at the end of the year.
If it's an odd team, yep. If they do that, then someone will have a bye at the end of the year for their last round because being an odd game.
You've got other issues to deal with on the commission. Can I get you to sort this one out? No one wants to drop young Morris from the Brisbane Lions. And there is no question that Hippie Hipwood is going to come in. My gut feeling is he's going to finish playing as a defender for the rest of the season. What say you?
With Hipwood?
Hippie. In the back half.
Well, you could probably that's a fair argument. The fact is their forward line's looking really good. More space. Yep. Joe's been really good. Morris, he doesn't get a lot of the ball, but he's always hitting the scoreboard. He gets his 1 or 2 a game.
And the Rayner man's become this sort of quasi centre-half forward or sort of target, if you like.
Yeah, I think, well, you look at Cam Rayner and the body shape that he is. He's a powerful athlete.
Yeah.
And so the role that he was playing, he would go into the middle, but he can't play the middle for a long period of time because his tank's still developing. But then he's had to play as a high half forward. Where high half forwards are your workhorses. High half forward are the blokes that work. You talk about it before with Richmond, the Castagnas, these guys who would just work up, play a role and get back. And they might have 10, 12, maybe 14 touches if they're having a really good game. With Hipwood down there, so they had Charlie, they had Hipwood, they had Danaher. You're not having Cam Rayner in the forward 50. So what he's doing, he's using all his petrol tickets up the ground, going into the midfield, and then he's exhausted. He might have 1 shot a game. The last couple of weeks with Hippie being across half back, he's been having 2 goals, 3 goals a game because there's a spot for him to go in there and use his strength, use his athleticism, and use his overhead marking.
I like it. And when they line up against the Bulldogs in the grand final, at least they've got an extra tall to take on the 3 tools at the Dogs. Because if not, there's some problems.
Well, what they did have in the past, it was a Darcy Gardner, it was a Harris Andrews, and it was a Jack Payne.
Yeah.
And Marcus Adams was before that, before he had to retire with concussion.
Yeah.
And they're down. Darcy moved forward, then did his knee. Jack Payne's got that foot issue. So it was pretty much Ryan Lester and Harris Andrews on the weekend.
I'm feeling it in thy waters that Hippie's going to play the last month in defence.
And if you ask
him, he was an All-Australian centre-half back.
I know that.
Don't worry, he'll let everyone know.
I'd like to see him play just a little bit back shoulder before he starts getting too creative. But nevertheless, I just reckon the Lions' balance is better when you've got that extra tool. Not dissimilar to the Dogs when they got the lobster out.
I've got last question for you, Hodgie. And that is, you said a couple of weeks ago, and I don't want to misquote you here, but you didn't think Brisbane was going as well this year as they were last year. Do you still hold that view, or do you think they're starting to get closer?
Round 11, I had a line through them.
No, I know. This is only a couple of weeks ago.
They'd won 4.5 games, and they weren't playing great football. And I think even in this run that they've had, if you speak to a lot of the Lions, at times they're not playing convincing football. They're doing enough because they've got a talented list, and yes, they've got some injuries, but they were winning just at times. The Sydney game was an amazing game. That was 2 quality teams that had a red-hot crack against each other. St Kilda obviously not up to that stage, but the Lions haven't put a foot wrong. I think they've won 10 of the last 12 and had a draw in there against Adelaide, I think it was.
Yep.
So they're doing what they have to do. But I guess the big question for them is when it does get to final stage, and is there top end talent there with the injuries that they do have to their players?
In one word, Hodgie, should Tom Emmett have been banned for the dump tackle?
Can't comment. Have not seen it. I'll leave that to Whitey to fill that fill the void for me.